today with Viktor Pelevin, a young Russian novelist.
Relatively young.
Relatively young. There's a good insight into Viktor right there, but a relatively young Russian novelist. He's young for us because the work is just now coming into translation this fall, or this summer rather, Oman Ra, his novel about, for lack of a better word, about the Soviet space adventures, has come into print. Earlier than that we had The Yellow Arrow from New Directions. Very few authors under 35 who have seen 3 of their novels, because there's another one coming, and also some of your short stories have appeared in English. Very few authors from Russia have had this very early advantage of publication in this country. And for better or for worse, you are going to be, probably for the next generation, the standard by which we know what has been called post-Soviet literature. I mean, I'm loading up all of these words because the word post-Soviet literature, I think, is probably something you would.
You're trying to burden me with the responsibility,
yes.
Clark.
Yes.
You're gonna fail.
Yes. So this burden of this responsibility is that, well, you know, people will say, well, yes, I know Russian literature since the fall of communism, and his name is Viktor Pelevin. And I've seen it, in fact, on the blurbs for your books. People saying that here is the first voice of post-Soviet literature. So you're a post-Soviet man, post-Soviet novelist, and so let's rid ourselves of that burden. What is your own understanding of that phrase? Does it have any meaning in Russia? Does it have any meaning to you, or is this purely an American commercial phrase?
Which phrase do you mean?
Post-Soviet literature. Post-Soviet literature, post-Soviet writer.
Yep, I think it makes some sense, because, you know, Soviet literature, well, it was awful, but it existed. Post-Soviet literature just does not exist, you know.
I think that, but what commercially we're trying to say when we try to sell a book or market a book or even describe a book as post-Soviet, we're saying, well, now this is the dilemmas of people who are caught in inflation, and they are caught in the mafia, and they are caught in the dilemmas of too much freedom, or of freedom, perverted freedoms, where they never had it before. And it's still, it seems to me, a kind of continuation of the socialist realist conventions of literature, only now some of the terms have been changed, and it seems to me you're not really part of that at all.
Well, that's a very particular kind of freedom you're talking about. It's like, you know, there are some people who are fighting for money, for the real thing, and, you know, the others are just, you know, are left absolutely free, you know, to do anything they want, you know.
Well, you would, I think, be
they're not trying to take part in this, you know.
Yeah, it would seem to me that the books that we have, the books I've read, and the stories I've read, are really dealing fundamentally with questions of freedom. By that I mean freedom from time, even in the Yellow Arrow.
And freedom from freedom. Clark.
Freedom from freedom. Yes, exactly. Although in both of these books, the character in the last couple of paragraphs does step into a kind of frightening new freedom. He gets off. One gets off the train. One escapes the Soviet space agency.
Now, Clark, first I want to make a point. This book, Oman Ra, it's not about, you know, Soviet space adventures.
Right,
it's about Soviet, you know, cosmic adventures. You know,
yes.
Cosmos is a Greek word, and it has several meanings. And one of them is, you know, it could be understood as some kind of whatever cultural, ideological paradigm. You know, so sphere of ideology. You know, in terms of Plato, you know, he called those things, you know, Eidos. You know what it is. So, you know, it's a sphere of ideas in which you live. So it's about, you know, this inner cosmos of a Soviet man or woman, and it's about the adventures that, you know, took place in this cosmos.
Yes.
So it has nothing to do with space.
No, I don't want to give away too much about the book for anyone who is going to be picking it up and who is going to be sucked into the story as much as Oman Ra was sucked into his own supposed role as a cosmonaut, until towards the end, when he realized that things were somewhat different. It's also I think people have, in trying to describe your work, have been thrashing around for a number of models. You know, the tenderness of Chekhov, the biting satire of Bulgakov, whatever it may be, the grasp of society of a Gorky.
I think they were just trying to remember all Russian names.
They're trying to. I think so too. But are there real models in your own mind from Russian literature that do apply?
Are you talking about influences?
Yes. Yeah.
Well,
I think you talked about Platonov at one time.
No, I was talking about Plato.
That Plato, I see. not his Russian son, I see.
Platonov, it's a wonderful surname.
Yes.
Sounds like somebody, who has Plato as one of his
I see.
ancestors.
Okay, I thought there was okay. You were talking about our Plato, everyone's Plato, the Greek Plato.
So basically, about influences, it's a very simple question. If you're under some influence, and if you're aware of that, then you are no longer under this influence.
It's true.
Yep.
It's true.
And if you don't understand this, there is no way to discuss it. So I don't know what to say.
Well, how about Pink Floyd?
Well,
and about American pop culture in general, because that's also in your work.
American pop culture.
Well,
I know nothing about American pop culture. Well, I listen to some music, but basically I like British music more than American, because now here in this country, when I hear American songs, they make much more sense. It's a strange thing, But if you listen to them in Moscow, they just don't resonate.
You had mentioned to me once that Moscow is the ideal place to be living these days for getting American culture before the Americans get it. You saw Independence Day a month before it played in the American theaters.
Well, I think I saw it in June.
In June, before it even made sense, before July 4th, because of the bootleg tapes and the pirating tapes and all the rest of it. Are there other? But you give a sense of a Moscow that is wide open. For better and for worse, maybe for worse.
Well, yes, it's wide open. In fact, this word "open," usually it is used in regard to a door that could be closed. And there is nothing around. No walls, no doors, no windows.
It's sort of like a Dada-like painting in which you have a door in the middle of an open field, right?
Exactly.
Exactly. Sort of a Salvador Dali door. What is your own role, or how do you perceive a role, or do you even perceive your role within current within current Russian writing, within current Moscow writing? Are you outside? Are you outside a sphere, or are you inside?
What does it mean, current Moscow writing?
Well, I'm asking you to define it. The writers who are currently writing in Moscow, or the writers who are currently writing in Russia, do they? And you have won prizes in Russia, so you are clearly an acknowledged author of this generation. But do you play any role within the literary hierarchy? Do you belong to clubs? Do you join other writers in readings or anything like that?
I'm not a member of any, writers' organization, or I'm not a member of the writers' union. But if you think that books can play, some role in what is called literary process. Actually, I don't know what this expression means, literary process. Well, I think that, yes, I've got quite many readers, and I'm really happy with it.
Well, the satire in your books, particularly in Omen Ra, where, for example, Kissinger attacks a bear with a knife when he's on a visit, and the bear is even an army man inside a bear suit in order to provide hunting experience for important visitors. How does this satire play with the Russian reader? I mean, because some of it is wincingly cruel.
For some reason, I hate this word, satire. Because in Russian language, in Russian culture, it has very bad connotations. Because for many years under communism, we used to have what was called satire, and usually it was supposed to expose, some minor scenes, done somewhere by somebody, and it's really an ugly word. And I'd rather not use it.
What would you substitute? Or what do Russians substitute for this kind of new satirical writing? Since it no longer, since it no longer has the same.
Well, in Russia, our critics they call me postmodernist, but I also don't know what could it mean, because we never had, any modernism, After socialist realism, we got postmodernism.
This is a rather strong, long leap. But I'm just wondering, do the Russian readers rise up when their history is being ridiculed or shredded in front of them by some of your
Russian history is something that used to be rewritten every 5 years. So it's rewritten once again, and it's just a game.
So do people take it in good spirit? They acknowledge you as a humorist. I'm just trying to see where you fall in the broad spectrum of literary judgment in your own country.
I don't really know, because I don't think that there is a general picture. Because I know that some of our critics, well, they like my stuff. Some of them just hate me. So what can I say? How do critics or how do readers perceive it? That depends on a person. And I don't have any general picture. The way in which your work has found a very early and almost immediate response in the West, do you have any reason to, or do you know why that has happened? No.
Is it? You have
maybe because it was published.
yes. But of all the books that could have been chosen, of all the fickle fingers of fate.
Do you really think that there is a guy, sitting, somewhere, and choosing?
Well,
nobody cares, Clark.
Well, you're even more nihilistic than I. I don't know that there's not someone choosing, that there's not some kind of taste that is world taste. I know we were, you and I and a couple of other authors were up in Minneapolis a short while ago, and I was thinking at that time that we in America, especially when we view Russian literature and the whole tradition of Russian literature so far as we know it, which is not really very impressive, we impose a kind of template over the Russian experience and say that yes we knew Tolstoy, yes we knew Dostoevsky, and we knew Turgenev, we knew all the greats, and then there was this long period in which nothing really happened according to our mind, and then suddenly
Clark, I think I got your point.
Yeah.
And this is something it looks like you imply that literature, Russian literature or American literature, is sort of supposed to reflect something. And I don't think so. I think that any literary text, if it is a good literary text, it reflects only itself.
Precisely. That's precisely the point I was trying to make. That we have this template that we impose, and the last sort of heavy impression that was made on the West was by Solzhenitsyn, and so work that does not, in a sense, portray a very gray and wet and cruel world. Made up of sort of lone heroes trudging to their deaths, seems to be then strikingly different from the norm. And I'm just wondering if what we have established as the norm is simply the result of our own ignorance or the lack of many models to have read, or if we are simply imposing a kind of a journalistic need to extract from literature a particular kind of meaning, and which literature doesn't really.
There's a journalistic need, and I don't think that for instance,
which Solzhenitsyn feeds, by the way. He feeds a journalistic need. I'm sorry.
But if you want to find out how things are in Russia, why bother reading novels? Why bother writing them? If you want to describe the situation, well, some kind of social situation or something of that kind, why bother inventing heroes? Doing something, thinking something, I'd rather write, a good article and publish it in some newspaper.
In the Yellow Arrow, the book that New Directions brought out, you have a curious device of numbering the chapters from 12 back down to 0, so that you have the opportunity here, as we're riding on a train that is heading towards a broken bridge, to be actually moving forward and backward in time simultaneously, it seems. You know, it's a very Calvino-like feel, at least for someone like me, that you are simultaneously developing a plot in what seems to be a future, but we're really viewing the future from a past that is ever widening. And you have some reflections on that in the book. And I'm just wondering...
Basically, like, I think that people are not viewing the future, you know, it's beyond the possibilities, you know, people are always viewing the past. You know,
and you said
and they call it the future.
Yeah,
you know?
right. And at the end, your character Andre walks off the train. Now, actually getting a ticket to go off the train, in a sense, or forcing his way off the train, and to walk uncertainly into the fields where the rest of the world is. And he's been on, so far as he can tell, for years he's been on this train. And lives have died, and in fact, by the end, there's an accumulation of bodies that are appearing at the side of the train. It's tempting, as again some critics have been tempted to read this as a parable or as some sort of a historical sense of Russia, or at least some national parable. It's also possible to read it almost in a Zen-like way, to read it as a mystical vision of life's journey, of the indeterminacy of life's journey. I'm just wondering where on that possible range of spectrum did you have the greatest pleasure in writing? I mean, what was it? Was it the sense of a symbol of Russian society that you were really most involved in, or was it the sense of the philosophical?
Like, you know, I just don't write this way, you know. I'm not inventing symbols and metaphors. You know, I'm describing a certain story that takes place in a certain dimension that I invent. And, you know, maybe it means something for somebody, but for me it means literally what's written in the text, you know.
Well, literally what's written in the text, though.
And I don't know what it means. And maybe it doesn't mean anything, you know, it's exactly what it is.
Well, we
and
have
that's what literature is all about, you know.
We have a couple of episodes here that we can take a look at.
I suddenly understood anew the long-lost meaning of the words I was so fed up with seeing, staring at me every morning from the wall of the training hall. Life always has room for heroism. It was not just romantic nonsense, but a precise and sober statement of the fact that our Soviet life is not the ultimate instance of reality, but only, as it were, its anteroom. I imagined it this way: that there is no space anywhere in America between the glaring shop window and the parked Cadillac for heroism, and there can be no space for it, apart, of course, from that rare moment when a Soviet spy passes by. But here in Russia, you can only be on an apparently identical pavement outside an identical shop window in a post-war or pre-war period, and this is what opens the door leading to heroism, not in the external world, but within, in the very depths of the soul.
You've spoken on a couple of occasions, on many occasions in this book, about heroism. You could, I think, there's an old quote from a Russian author about blessed is the country that does not need heroes. America would certainly seem to be a country that really that doesn't need heroes in the same way that the Soviet Union did, with its official hero of Soviet labor and hero of Soviet, right, the new Soviet man, hero of whatever.
And now I guess, hero of Russia, hero of Ukraine, hero of Kazakhstan.
Yes. What is the you seem to be playing certainly with the notion of hero, because this Omen Ra is embarked on, after all, a heroic quest, as he understood it, at least as it was sold to him. And it seems to me, one of the saddest parts of the story, that is one of the really moving parts of the story, is the betrayal of heroism that runs, I think, through all of your stories. That it's someone who tries to do a heroic thing, or who is brought into the orbit of heroism, is ridiculed and is finally destroyed. The young friend who is simply shot, who wanted to be a space person, who wanted to be a pilot, and the impossibility of being a hero in a society that demands everyone to be a hero seems to be one of the central paradoxes in your work. Is that true or not?
Well, in Russia, it's something quite natural. This course of brave in spirit, or how it was called in the novel, that was something very real. You would get people coming to schools and telling young kids about something they did in the course of their lives. And basically, Soviet Union, actually, it was a terrible empire. It just needed soldiers, ready to sacrifice their lives, for the sake of 10,000 people, living in dachas around Moscow. That was very cynical, of course, and it was terrible. But at the same time, it was quite funny,
Ho ho. The betrayal of heroism, is so. Is heroism and the betrayal of, and the realization that you have been taken, the realization that there is no heroes, or that it's for the 10,000 people of the nomenclatura, or whatever it may be, would lead, it would seem, in a Western work, to be, for a moment, to be a little prejudicial to say that you're not part of the West. You are. But in our kind of literature, it would lead to an overwhelming desire for revenge, an overwhelming desire to expose and to fight. And what right now? What is the latest thing that you're working on right now?
Oh, I believe that it's a very bad.
You should not talk about. Oh, you're a tough interview, Victor.
I'm just trying to be honest, Clark.
Okay, well, but there is a book that is on its way.
Yes.
That has already appeared in Russian, has been translated, has appeared in Britain, is coming here very, very soon. What about it? Tell us about it.
The one that is coming from Britain, it's called Life of Insects. Life of Insects. Okay. It's a novel about insects. And I think that the excerpt from it will be published in Grand Street in the next issue, this magazine. And maybe it will be published here as a book also. It's about insects, Clark.
Oh, sure.
About the problems, about whatever.
Do you think we'll be filing it under etymology in the bookstores, or under novel?
Under etymological novel.
Etymological novel. I see. Okay. Thank you, Victor. You're always a delight.
Thank you, Clark.
Yeah. No, I'm not about ready to let you go just yet. The experience in Iowa City. Just give us a couple of seconds. What's it like to be Victor Pelevin in Iowa City? What are you doing right now? Writing all the time? Reading?
The best part of this experience is that I have some moments when I can stop to be Victor Pelevin.
It's not a machine that goes on all the time.
No,
you can actually turn off the Victor Pelevin machine. And
no, that's the worst thing about about being a writer. That if you don't take care, this writer will try to live instead of you.
Yes, I know.
Forget But I think you know what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean. I know exactly what you mean. Well, Victor, this is.
I'm very happy here, Clark, and I'm working a lot.
No, I know you. It's a delight to have you here, and for anyone who's been watching and wondering what is this Victor Pelevin like? Let me say that that he's not always as contrary in his questions and in his answers as it seems. Thank you very, very much for coming in, Victor. Bye.